They played Mama, I'm Coming Home, and in that instant the world seemed to stop. The air turned heavy, almost sacred, as the first fragile notes drifted through the street. The crowd that had gathered thought it was just another young busker strumming away at a classic rock ballad. But when those chords reached the ears of the man standing quietly in the distance, everything changed. Ozzy Osbourne, once the wildest frontman alive, the so-called Prince of Darkness, froze in place. His body, fragile from years of battles with addiction, illness and age, seemed to turn to stone. His lips trembled, his eyes watered, and for a brief moment, the living legend looked less like a rock god and more like a broken man haunted by memories too heavy to carry. The crowd didn't recognize him at first. Why would they? This wasn't the larger-than-life icon screaming into stadium microphones or biting the head off a bat in a blaze of infamy. This was an old man in the twilight of his years, hidden behind sunglasses, moving carefully with the stiffness of someone who'd spent a lifetime punishing his body. But the moment that voice, the street kid's voice, rose with those opening lyrics, Ozzy's mask slipped. Tears filled his eyes. He clutched his chest, not from pain but from recognition. Because Mama, I'm Coming Home was never just a song, it was his confession, his plea, his lifeline. And now, hearing it from a stranger's lips, decades after he first wrote it, felt like the universe holding a mirror to his soul. To understand why Ozzy froze that day, you have to understand what the song meant to him. And to understand the song, you have to go back to the heart of his life. The chaos, the betrayals, the addictions, and the one person who somehow, through it all, kept standing by his side. The truth is, Mama, I'm Coming Home was written in the early 1990s, during one of the darkest stretches of Ozzy's marriage to Sharon. The world saw them as an untouchable rock and roll power couple. She was the iron-willed manager who turned her husband's self-destructive madness into a multi-million-dollar empire. He was the uncontainable frontman of Black Sabbath turned solo megastar, larger than life, outrageous, unstoppable. But behind closed doors, their marriage was hanging by threads. There were nights when Sharon didn't know if Ozzy would come home at all, or if he did, whether he would stumble in drunk, high, or dangerously violent. There were days when his infidelity cut deeper than any addiction ever could, when Sharon wondered if love was enough to keep them together. And through it all, Ozzy felt the weight of guilt that words alone couldn't erase. He was terrified of losing her, terrified of waking up one day and realizing the only woman who had ever truly seen him, truly saved him, had finally walked away for good. That fear is what fueled Mama, I'm Coming Home. It wasn't just a ballad, it was a desperate apology wrapped in melody. A love letter written from a man who knew he had broken something precious and who would spend the rest of his life trying to put it back together. When Ozzy first recorded the song in 1991, even his bandmates noticed he was different. The Prince of Darkness wasn't roaring, he was confessing. The lyrics poured out like tears, words of regret, fear, longing. For once, Ozzy wasn't hiding behind theatrics or outrageous stunts. He was naked on tape, vulnerable, and everyone who heard it knew this wasn't just music. This was a man bleeding through sound. Fast forward decades later, and that's why the Street Kids' performance hit like a thunderbolt. For everyone else, it was a nostalgic hit. For Ozzy, it was like hearing his sins sung back to him. Every betrayal, every drunken night, every cruel word, every hospital visit, every fight that nearly ended his marriage. It was all there, condensed into those haunting chords. He tried to hold himself together, but the memories kept flooding in. He remembered the time Sharon nearly left for good. The night she packed her bags, weary of the chaos, weary of the broken promises, weary of being strong for two people instead of one. He remembered standing in their home, begging her to stay, swearing he'd change. And then he remembered the crushing shame of knowing he hadn't changed fast enough. Mama, I'm Coming Home was his vow, his attempt to say, I may be lost, but I will always find my way back to you. And for Sharon, hearing it back then was proof that somewhere deep beneath the madness, her husband was still in there. The man she fell in love with, the man worth fighting for. But in that street performance years later, Ozzy wasn't hearing it as a vow anymore. He was hearing it as a reminder of the woman who carried him through everything, the woman who fought cancer while still managing his career, the woman who shielded their children from his darkest days, the woman who refused to let him drown in his own demons. The boy kept playing, unaware of the storm unraveling inside the legend standing before him. And maybe that was the beauty of it. It wasn't a staged performance. It wasn't a comeback concert. It wasn't even meant for Ozzy. It was just a song floating in the air, reminding him of who he was, what he had done, and who had saved him from himself. The crowd noticed his tears now. They whispered, pointed, and then slowly realized who they were looking at. But Ozzy didn't care. For once, he wasn't the performer. He wasn't the icon. He wasn't the scandal. He was just John Michael Osbourne from Birmingham, England, a poor kid who had clawed his way out of the gutter, ruined nearly everything that mattered, and somehow, miraculously, still had someone waiting at home. That's why he froze, because in those opening chords, he wasn't hearing music. He was hearing his life. He was hearing his marriage. He was hearing every near loss and every second chance Sharon had ever given him. He was hearing forgiveness. And the truth that almost no one around him understood, is that the song carried a secret Ozzy had buried in those lyrics decades ago. A secret so raw, so painful, that even Sharon, for all her strength, had never fully let go of it. A secret that explained why Mama, I'm Coming Home could reduce the most unbreakable rock star alive to tears on a street corner. And that secret, that comes next. To understand why Mama, I'm Coming Home broke Ozzy in public, you have to understand the war that raged behind the doors of his marriage. Because Ozzy and Sharon's story was never a fairy tale. It was a battlefield of love, loyalty, betrayal, and survival. From the outside, they looked unstoppable. Sharon was the iron-willed manager who had saved Ozzy's career after Black Sabbath fired him in 1979. She took a man spiraling into addiction, barely able to function, and turned him into a solo superstar. The album Blizzard of Oz became a massive hit, and Sharon's business instincts proved sharper than anyone in the industry had given her credit for. She wasn't just a wife. She was a general leading her husband's war for survival in the music world. But the public only saw the victories. They didn't see the battles inside their home, because Ozzy, for all his talent, was also his own worst enemy. Drugs, alcohol, and reckless affairs stalked their marriage from the very beginning. Sharon was the one holding everything together, while Ozzy seemed determined to tear it apart. There were nights she waited for him, not knowing if he'd ever walk through the door again. And when he did, sometimes he came stumbling in drunk, other times high, and far too often with the scent of betrayal clinging to him. Ozzy was unfaithful, and Sharon knew it. Some affairs were whispered about in tabloids. Others were private betrayals only she endured. Each one cut her deeper than the last. And yet she stayed, not out of weakness, but out of a belief that beneath the chaos, there was a man worth saving. A man she couldn't abandon because she knew no one else could ever hold him together. But love like that isn't free, it costs you. Sharon carried wounds no one could see, emotional scars from fights that left her shattered, nights when Ozzy's addiction pushed him to violence, when his rage and despair turned against the one person who stood by him. The darkest moment came in 1989, when Ozzy, out of his mind on drugs, attacked Sharon and nearly strangled her to death. He didn't even remember doing it, and yet, even then, she didn't leave. Most women would have walked away and never looked back. Sharon didn't. Instead, she rebuilt him. Piece by piece, she forced him into rehab, forced him to face his demons, forced him to confront the wreckage of his own life. She became both wife and warden, lover and savior, enduring pain most people could never forgive. So when Ozzy later wrote Mama, I'm Coming Home, it wasn't just a ballad. It was a confession, a desperate attempt to say, I know I've nearly destroyed you, I know I've betrayed you, but I need you, you are home, and without you, I'm lost. The lyrics themselves tell the story. He sings of times I've been so lonesome and times I've been so blind. He admits he's broken, but promises he's coming back, no matter what it takes. And for Sharon, hearing that wasn't just sweet, it was brutal, because she knew every word was true. He had been blind. He had left her lonesome. And yet, here he was, swearing once again that he would come back to her. But here's the painful truth. Mama, I'm Coming Home wasn't just an apology, it was a cycle. The song itself became a symbol of the loop they lived in. Ozzy would lose himself, betray her, nearly push her away forever. Then he would break, confess, and come crawling back. Sharon would forgive. And then, sooner or later, the chaos would begin again. There were moments when even Sharon thought the marriage was doomed. She admitted years later that she had packed her bags more than once. She had drawn up divorce papers. She had stared at herself in the mirror and whispered, "I can't do this anymore." But every time something pulled her back. Maybe it was love, maybe it was loyalty, maybe it was the unshakable sense that without her, Ozzy would not survive. And she was probably right, because time and time again, it was Sharon's strength that saved him. She dragged him into rehab when he resisted. She handled the business deals when he was too far gone to function. She raised their children while protecting them from his addictions and public scandals. Sharon wasn't just his wife, she was his shield against himself. But that shield took damage. The betrayal of infidelity never fully left her heart, and Ozzy, in his rare moments of clarity, knew it. He knew he had broken her in ways he could never fully repair. That's why decades later, he confessed publicly to cheating again, even after years of promising Sharon he had changed. In 2016, the news broke that Ozzy had been unfaithful with a hairstylist, and Sharon walked out. After more than 3 decades of marriage, she finally left. For months, the world thought it was truly over. Sharon appeared on television, raw and shaken, admitting she didn't know if she could ever forgive him. And Ozzy, he admitted he was broken. He admitted he had thrown away the only constant in his life. And once again, the words of his song came back to haunt him, "Mama, I'm coming home." The irony was brutal. A song he had written as a promise in 1991 was now a confession replaying in the headlines of 2016. He had betrayed her again. He had wounded her again. And once again, he was crawling back. But hear what makes their story almost unbearable to watch yet impossible to look away from. Sharon took him back. Not because she had to, not because she was weak, but because she chose to. She demanded that Ozzy enter intense therapy for sex addiction. She demanded that he confront the darkest parts of himself he had avoided for decades. And Ozzy, older now, frailer, finally surrendered. He admitted he was a fool. He admitted that without her, he was nothing. And somehow, through all of it, they rebuilt. Again. It's easy to look at their marriage and see dysfunction. It's easy to call it toxic. But the truth is more complicated. Because through all the betrayals, through all the broken promises, there was still a love that refused to die. Sharon could have walked away. Many times, she didn't. And Ozzy could have given up on himself. He didn't. That's why "Mama, I'm Coming Home" carried such devastating weight that day on the street. It wasn't just a song about missing someone. It was the soundtrack of their entire marriage. The battles, the breakups, the reconciliations, the betrayals, the forgiveness. Every lyric carried the weight of scars that had never fully healed. And here's the part most people never realized. There's a hidden admission in the song. When Ozzy sings about being so blind, about being lonesome, about finally coming home, he wasn't just talking about Sharon. He was talking about himself. Because Ozzy's greatest battle was never against fame or drugs or the industry. His greatest battle was against himself. And Sharon was the only person who ever truly saw that. She saw the boy from Birmingham who never believed he was good enough. She saw the addict who used chaos to escape the crushing weight of insecurity. She saw the broken man who, behind all the theatrics, just wanted to be loved. And that's why she stayed. But staying came at a cost. For every betrayal she forgave, for every fight she endured, Sharon paid in silence, and Ozzy knew it. That's why, decades later, when a street musician sang those opening chords, Ozzy couldn't stand tall anymore, because the song wasn't just about Sharon. It was about the pieces of himself he could never give back to her. Every affair, every overdose, every relapse, it was all buried in those lyrics. A lifetime of apologies sung in 4 minutes. And now, in front of strangers, Ozzy felt the weight of all of it crashing down on him. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't memory. This was judgment. The song itself was holding him accountable, reminding him that every time he sang "Mama, I'm Coming Home," he was admitting how many times he had left. And yet, through all the darkness, one truth remained: Sharon stayed. She loved him when no one else could. She forgave him when no one else would. And that's why the song still breaks him open today, because it's not just about love, it's about survival. And yet, within those haunting words, lies an even deeper confession, one that explains why the song has haunted Ozzy more than any other in his career. Because what few people realized is that Mama, I'm Coming Home wasn't just written for Sharon, it was written for someone else too. And that secret would change everything. The truth about Mama, I'm Coming Home is that it was never just a love song. It was a confession, a secret wrapped in melody, a message buried so deeply in Ozzy's voice that most fans missed it entirely. But Sharon didn't, and neither did Ozzy himself, though he spent decades trying to run from what it really meant. The song was born in 1991, during one of the most turbulent crossroads of his life. Ozzy had just come through a storm of drugs, infidelity, and near divorce. He was clean enough to function, but still fragile, still guilty, still afraid of what the future held. His marriage to Sharon was hanging by threads, but for once he wanted to say something real, something that wasn't about bats or blood or chaos or destruction. He wanted to write a song that stripped away the mask. So he turned to Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead, his longtime friend, drinking buddy, and one of the few people who understood the pain behind the madness. Together, they wrote what would become one of Ozzy's most hauntingly personal songs. Lemmy was known for his sharp, cutting lyrics. He could put into words what Ozzy couldn't say outright. And in Mama, I'm Coming Home, he helped Ozzy write what was essentially a letter, not to fans, not to the world, but to Sharon. And here where the confession lies. On the surface, the lyrics sound simple. A man telling his partner that after all the pain, after all the running, after all the blindness, he's coming home. But between the lines is something far darker, because Ozzy wasn't just singing about being away physically. He was singing about being lost spiritually, lost inside his addictions, his betrayals, his guilt. He wasn't promising to come home from a tour. He was promising to come back from the edge of destruction. The opening line alone carries that weight. Times have changed and times are strange. It sounds like a simple observation, but for Ozzy, it was an admission. He was saying, I know I've changed. I know I've become someone you barely recognize. I know I've hurt you, but I want to find my way back. Then there's the line, I've seen your face 100 times. To Sharon, it was more than recognition. It was acknowledgement. He had seen her stand by him during overdoses. He had seen her face in the courtroom when his scandals went public. He had seen her face when she found out about his affairs. He had seen her crying, furious, broken. And every time, he knew it was her face that kept him tethered to reality. The chorus, I'm Coming Home, wasn't just romantic. It was desperate. Ozzy was admitting that he had strayed so far from the man Sharon married, he wasn't sure if she'd even still want him. Every word was less a promise and more a plea, don't give up on me, I can still make it back, please let me come home. This was the hidden confession, the thing fans didn't hear when they played the song on the radio or watched him perform it on stage. To them, it was a powerful rock ballad. To Ozzy, it was a cry for forgiveness he didn't think he deserved. And that's why the song became so important to Sharon. She knew that behind all the showmanship, the theatrics, the outrageous headlines, this was the one place where Ozzy spoke the truth. He could lie to her, he could make excuses, he could relapse, betray, and beg. But in the song, there was no hiding. The song was his soul laid bare. What made the confession even more powerful was how it clashed with his public image. Ozzy Osbourne was supposed to be indestructible, the Prince of Darkness, the wild man who terrified parents and thrilled teenagers. He was chaos incarnate. But on Mama, I'm Coming Home, he was soft, he was vulnerable, he was fragile. And that fragility shocked people. Fans weren't used to hearing Ozzy sound like that. They expected him to roar, to growl, to rage. Instead, he sounded almost broken, almost pleading, and in that contrast lay the real genius of the song. It was the first time many realized that behind the leather, the eyeliner, and the insane stories, Ozzy Osbourne was just a man terrified of losing the woman who held his world together. But here's the deeper layer. Because while Sharon was the obvious inspiration, Ozzy later admitted the song also carried a double meaning. In his own way, he was writing it to his mother, Lillian, who had died of cancer in 2001. Ozzy had been devastated by her death, and the song, though written a decade earlier, seemed to echo with guilt and longing for her too. That's why the word Mama wasn't just symbolic, it was literal. For Sharon, it was a nickname, a term of love. For Ozzy, it was also a reminder of his mother, the woman who had given him life, raised him in poverty, and believed in him even when the world mocked him. Losing her was one of the most painful moments of his life, and the song became a bridge between the two most important women in his world. So when Ozzy froze in the street decades later, hearing that busker sing, "Mama, I'm coming home," he wasn't just hearing his marriage in the lyrics. He was hearing his mother. He was hearing every failure as a son, every regret, every moment he wished he had been stronger for her. The song wasn't just about Sharon. It was about every woman who had ever saved him from himself. Fans didn't know that. They thought it was a sweet ballad from a man known for madness. But Sharon knew, and Ozzy knew. That's why it cut so deep, because it wasn't entertainment, it was confession, it was apology, it was regret. Over the years, the song took on new meanings. When Sharon was diagnosed with cancer in 2002, Ozzy couldn't stop thinking about it. He nearly lost her then, and the song became unbearable to sing. Every time he heard those words, "I'm coming home," he thought about the possibility of a home without her in it. He thought about what life would mean if the woman who had held his hand through everything was suddenly gone, and it terrified him. For fans, the song was nostalgic. For Ozzy, it was prophecy. It was a reminder that one day, no matter how many times he promised to come back, there would be a day when he couldn't, and that day was coming sooner than anyone wanted to admit. That's why the song became almost sacred to him in his later years. It was no longer just an apology to Sharon or a tribute to his mother. It became a reflection of his mortality. The one thing Ozzy Osbourne had always denied, always outrun, always mocked, was finally catching up to him. His body was failing. His voice was weaker. His tour were cancelled. And suddenly, the words, "Mama, I'm coming home," sounded less like a promise of return and more like a farewell. Fans could feel it too. Whenever he performed the song in his later years, the crowds went silent. They didn't scream or thrash like they did for Crazy Train. They listened, they cried, because they knew they were hearing the truth, not the performance, not the myth, but the man. And that's the power of the song. It revealed the real Ozzy in a way no documentary, no interview, no reality show ever could. It showed the brokenness he tried to hide, the guilt he tried to laugh away, the confessions he couldn't say out loud but could sing. So when the boy played those chords on the street, the weight of decades crashed down on him. The affairs, the addictions, the betrayals, the hospital visits, his mother's death, Sharon's cancer. Every time he thought he had lost it all, and every time he somehow clawed his way back, it was all there wrapped in those four words, "I'm coming home." The song became a confession not just of his love, but of his failures. It was his way of saying, "I know I've broken everything I've ever touched, but please believe me, I want to come back. I want to be better. I want to be forgiven." That's why Ozzy froze, because the song was no longer a promise. It was a mirror, and what he saw in that mirror was the truth he had been running from his entire life. But the story doesn't end there, because if "Mama, I'm Coming Home" was Ozzy's confession, it was also his legacy. And the street performance that broke him open wasn't just about his past. It was about his future, his final years, his final chapter. And in that chapter, the song would take on its most heartbreaking meaning yet. The boy's guitar was slightly out of tune, his voice unpolished, but it didn't matter. In that moment, as he sang "Mama, I'm Coming Home," the song no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the man standing frozen in the crowd. It belonged to Ozzy Osbourne. The tears rolled down his face, unstoppable. He wasn't crying because of the performance itself. He wasn't crying because of the nostalgia of a hit song from the 90s. He was crying because every single word was now prophecy. Every chord was a reminder that his journey was coming full circle and his time was running out. Ozzy had always defied time. He was the rock star who should have died 1,000 times but didn't. He survived overdoses that would have killed anyone else. He walked away from accidents that should have broken him. He cheated death so often that people started to believe he was immortal. But here, on an ordinary street, listening to an ordinary boy, the truth sank in. He wasn't immortal. His body was failing. His days on stage were gone. His final chapter had already begun. And that's why the song hit so hard. "Mama, I'm Coming Home." It wasn't just a love song anymore. It wasn't just a confession. It was a farewell to his career, his fans, his family, and the world that had worshipped him and condemned him in equal measure. The crowd around him began to recognize who he was. Whispers spread like fire. "It's Ozzy. some pulled out phones, others just stared in disbelief. But for once, Ozzy didn't care about the spectacle. He didn't care about cameras or headlines. He didn't care about being the Prince of Darkness. He wasn't playing a role anymore. He was just a man standing in the twilight of his life, realizing he had reached the end of the road. Somewhere nearby, Sharon was watching, maybe not directly in the crowd, maybe from a distance, but she was there. She always had been. Through every relapse, every scandal, every hospital visit, every betrayal, she had been the one who stayed. And as the song filled the air, her eyes softened, because she knew this wasn't just Ozzy listening to music. This was Ozzy facing himself, facing his mortality, facing everything they had survived. And in a strange way, the song wasn't sad. It was beautiful, because in those words, "I'm coming home," was the truth Ozzy had spent a lifetime running from. Home wasn't just a place, it wasn't even just Sharon. Home was peace, home was forgiveness, home was letting go. For decades, Ozzy had been defined by chaos. He was the man who shocked the world, the man who lived without rules, the man who made destruction into art. But standing there in tears, he realized his true legacy wasn't the chaos. It was the love that survived it, the woman who forgave him, the family that endured him, the fans who stayed loyal even when he destroyed himself. That was home. That was what mattered. The boy finished the last line, holding the note longer than expected. The crowd applauded, but Ozzy barely heard it. He was somewhere else entirely. He was in Birmingham, a poor boy with no future, staring at his mother and dreaming of a way out. He was in 1989, holding Sharon after nearly losing her forever. He was in 2002, terrified of losing her to cancer. He was in 2016, confessing to another affair and begging for forgiveness once again. And he was here, now, realizing that coming home wasn't about returning from tour. It was about preparing for the final journey. The weight of that realization broke him open. He was Ozzy the rock god anymore. He was John Michael Osbourne, the boy who had always been afraid he wasn't enough. And as the crowd stared, some in awe, some in discomfort, he let them see the truth. The strongest legends are still just men when the music stops. And yet there was peace in it too, because as painful as the song was, it was also healing. It reminded him that no matter how many mistakes he made, he still had Sharon. He still had his children. He still had millions of fans who saw past the scandals and loved him for who he really was. He had already come home in the truest sense. That's why he didn't hide the tears. He let them fall unashamed, because they weren't just tears of regret. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude that after everything, the addictions, the affairs, the madness, he was still here, still alive, still loved. And in that moment, he finally understood the full meaning of the song he had sung for decades. It wasn't just about returning to Sharon after another disaster. It wasn't just about seeking forgiveness from his mother's memory. It was about the universal truth every human faces at the end, that no matter where we wander, no matter how far we stray, we are all trying to come home. For Ozzy, home meant Sharon's arms. It meant his children's forgiveness. It meant fans who saw the man behind the myth. And ultimately, it meant peace with himself. Peace he had chased his whole life, but never found until now. The boy packed up his guitar, unaware of the storm he had stirred in the legend before him. To him, it was just a song, but to Ozzy, it was everything. A confession, a farewell, a legacy. And that's the power of Mama, I'm Coming Home. It wasn't written for the charts. It wasn't written for fame. It was written because Ozzy needed it. He needed a way to tell Sharon what he couldn't say out loud. He needed a way to confess to himself. And in the end, it became more than just music. It became his prayer, his love letter, his final truth. The legacy of Ozzy Osbourne will always be tied to wild stories, outrageous stunts, and heavy metal madness. But those who truly understood him know that his real legacy is this: a man who broke everything he touched, but still found his way back to the only thing that mattered: love, forgiveness, home. And so, as the sun set that evening and the echoes of the song faded into silence, Ozzy stood there trembling but smiling. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding behind fame or chaos. He was just a man ready to come home. And that is how one song, sung by a stranger on the street, brought the Prince of Darkness to his knees. Not with fear, not with regret, but with the undeniable, unstoppable power of love. If this story touched your heart, help us keep these powerful legacies alive. Subscribe to our channel, share this video, and tell us what Mama I'm Coming Home means to you. Every voice matters in honoring the truth behind the music and the people who lived it.